Well, breaking news as we sit here live in the air at 1:33, and that is Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, who had rebelled against Vladimir Putin. And there were reports that it was an attempted coup. Then he seemed to be brought to heel by Vladimir Putin. There were reports that possibly he'd been paid off. We didn't quite understand fully the circumstances under which he abandoned this revolt against Putin after Putin had reportedly been targeting Prigozhin's men, which was like, it's this military faction in Russia that had been working for Putin in Ukraine and elsewhere, but then got a bit more independent under Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is known formally as Putin's chef, but turned into this military warrior. In any event, for a time there, he rebelled against Putin. He didn't like what Putin was doing to his men. A lot of guys he had pulled straight out of prison to fight for him. And Putin was in jeopardy. There was a real belief that, Putin could somehow be brought down by some who wanted to see it happen. That's not what happened. He brought Yevgeny Prigozhin back into the fold, and onward they went. He's now dead. According to breaking news reports, his plane mysteriously went down. We've got the video, and it does look very bizarre. I mean, it's disturbing. You can see that thing going straight down. It's a vertical line. And then we've got footage of the burning wreckage once it hits the ground. He was on the passenger manifest. He had reportedly been traveling, I think, from St. Petersburg to Moscow. They said that initially they said they weren't sure if he was on board, but now they are reporting he was on board. He is dead. It's tough to say this was likely accidental, guys. Let's be realistic. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of my skis here, but awfully coincidental. And when you know how Vladimir Putin acts when you try to betray him, this is what we're dealing with over there. This is not somebody who plays by any rules with which we are familiar.
There's 0.0001% chance that this is accidental. Prigozhin was just in Africa, released a video fairly recently, and it was interesting to see him back. He had been pushed into exile in Belarus, and we don't know what kind of agreement was made, but that was, a step to send him to Minsk and take control of his warriors who were taken out of Ukraine, some of them put back in Africa, presumably some back in Ukraine. We don't know the details of it. But what we do know is that steps from the Kremlin, Boris Nemtsov was shot in the head. And Boris Nemtsov was a very effective anti-Putin campaigner. We know that, Alexei Navalny was in prison, and he was just sentenced for another 19 years. People forget about, not only is he in prison, he has been poisoned. There was somebody in an anti-Putin person in Germany who was presumed to be poisoned recently too. Alexander Litvinenko, who was poisoned with polonium and died an excruciating death. And we know who poisoned him. And that person went on to serve in the Duma in Russia, became a bit of a hero. The Skripals, the couple in the UK who were former KGB, FSB operatives who were also poisoned. I mean, this is Anna Politskaya, the incredible journalist from Novaya Gazeta, the only independent newspaper in Russia, which has since been closed down at the start of the war in Ukraine, was brutally assassinated in a stairwell going into her apartment. This is a gangster country that is run by an actual dictator. We used to call them authoritarians, and it was appropriate for Putin for a while. But when there's no independent judiciary, when one cannot run as an independent candidate, when one speaks out against the government, one can expect to find themselves in jail or exile. That is not in any way democracy. Prigozhin was living on borrowed time because he did the thing that nobody dared to do. And he did it quite effectively too. But one thing that people do forget about, it wasn't just like, hey, we're going to march toward Moscow. They were going towards Moscow. They had shot down a plane that was a Russian plane. They had killed Russian soldiers on their way out of Ukraine to, by the way, complain about things that were acceptable and to complain about because they were just meat grinder soldiers at this point. As you said, Megyn, a lot of these people were were killers who had been released from prison and put into the Wagner Group. And the Wagner Group is actually the Wagner Group, named after Richard Wagner, the anti-Semitic German conductor who was a favorite of the Nazis, because they were started by somebody who was a fan of the Nazis, which is ironic when you accuse the Ukrainians of being a Nazi state run by a Jewish man. But this was inevitable. And in a way, I'm surprised it took this long, but that is a clear message. Do not try this, because when Putin, having sort of shaky support because of how poorly the war has gone, in it looking as if you can do this and get pretty far in doing that, they basically negotiated their way out of being overthrown or those troops battling on the streets of Moscow. That showed a weakness, and he had to show some strength. And the strength is to murder 10 other people too. And if there are people in the way to get to that one person, he'll do it.
It's just a reminder of who we're dealing with over there. You know, I do think that there's some sort of a belief that this is a man we can work with, this is a man we can negotiate with, you know, and it's not to justify the war in Ukraine, but, you know, the people who support the war in Ukraine say, like, he's not going to be deterred if we just pull out and say, okay, you know, you can have what you took so far, but we're out of it. It's no longer our battle. Like, that Vladimir Putin, if we pull out, is going to sense opportunity. He smells weakness. He will act on the weakness. He will grab something else. He's not afraid to be provocative. He's not afraid of anything. All he wants to do is build up Mother Russia to its former glory. So, I mean, I see the argument. This isn't necessarily proof of, you know, anything when it comes to our foreign policy, but other than this is not somebody who we can work with in a way that we would work with, you know, any truly friendly ally. Russia is run by a very dark man, and we're going to have to deal with that. You know, so is China, for that matter. It's like these are the guys who we're trying to craft our foreign policy with. And how do you have, you know, to me, it's like you want somebody tough in there. This could help somebody like a Trump. I'm going back to presidential politics. You want somebody tough. You don't want somebody squishy, soft, shirtless. I'm sorry. I'm just saying, like, this is what attracts people to a Donald Trump, is like, you need a little madness on our side, perhaps.
And we need to keep Donald Trump's shirt on by any means. Like,
and Joe Biden.
My God. And Joe Biden.
Joe Biden's.
To tie it to the top of the show, when we talked about Vivek Ramaswamy, when he came on the Fifth Column, we had a long and kind of interesting conversation just about this, where Moynihan and I were a bit skeptical about his plans, which was basically to negotiate with Putin and without Ukraine,
Correct.
Ukraine. So in a similar way to things were negotiated in the 1930s and 40s, to ways that small countries in Central Europe were not very fond of during and afterwards, he would do that and grant territory of Ukraine to Russia in exchange for promises of NATO not including Ukraine in the future. This shows, I think, kind of the naivete, or illustrates the naivete of that position, both in terms of, like, I can do the negotiating better than anyone else has ever negotiated, which is kind of his approach. You know, if they don't agree, then Ukraine joins NATO the next day, was one of his colorful ideas about all of that. But it also says, yes, Megyn, the person that is on the other side of this negotiation has been trying, and very consistent with Russian public opinion, even though we don't really know what Russian public opinion is, but we do know that there is that sense of lost national glory because of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. It's been a popular project, not just of Vladimir Putin, to meddle into Russia's so-called near abroad, its former imperial holdings. They've been doing this in Moldova, which is a very interesting country to watch right now, tiny country near Romania that's been trying really hard to not have their problems in Transnistria come over to the rest of the country. Certainly in Georgia and elsewhere, this is the person that you're dealing with long before NATO was ever being expanded or thought to be expanded. Russia and Vladimir Putin and others have been trying to restore this sense of lost empire, and will resort at, doesn't really care what people think. He's been launching one of the most brutal wars, civilian killing wars that we've seen in modern times, in our lifetimes, at least since the end of the Cold War, and continues to do it day after day and committing assassinations. So got to be clear-headed about that, regardless of what you think the wisdom of giving Ukrainians weapons are.
And one quick,
every country you just listed paid Hunter Biden money. Like you just went down like a limb. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I'm in the wrong racket.
He knows how to pick them. Yeah.
The one small thing to add to that is Matt is right in Russia's former empire and near abroad, but it's bigger than that too, because Putin is very conscious about expanding Russian power and showing Russia as a great power. It has nothing to do with NATO. And if it did have something to do with NATO, somebody has to explain to me why the number of civilians who have been killed by Russians and Russian bombers and Russian military in Syria and now in the Central African Republic are as high as they are. And they're as high as they are because they're trying to put their footprint in other places in the world. As America retreats, this is Putin's idea, we should be on the offensive. So this is not somebody who would be satiated by walking away from NATO. That was never in the cards for Georgia, for instance, and Ukraine. I mean, these are conversations that haven't happened, and they're invaded. So this is it's depressing, and this has, again, as you said, Megyn, this is actually a really important point. This doesn't have anything to do with whether or not we're giving money, giving too much money, giving too little money. This is just looking at a country on its own and its expansionist, revanchist ideas, and it is an imperial power, and it wants to be an imperial power, and it is acting like one. And the only thing that people like Putin care about is staying in power, and that's why Prigozhin just fell out of the sky.
Negative dings on credit reports happen to all sorts of people from all different socioeconomic backgrounds. Understanding the credit landscape can be really tough, and spending the time to dispute and then repair these so-called dings can be a full-time job. I mean, good luck to you. If you have kids, you have your own 9-to-5 job. For starters, you're going to have to deal with 3 separate credit bureaus. It's just a massive headache. It's also a common misconception that people with poor credit scores are just those who simply don't pay their credit card bills. These actually can be hardworking people who are negatively affected by divorce, identity theft, medical debt, student loans, and just don't have the time or the energy to fix it. But if you don't address negative credit items, they can haunt you for years to come. And when it counts the most, right? Like when it's time to get a mortgage at a competitive rate, those are high stakes. You don't want it to get screwed up. And we know that being relegated to the status of renter versus homeowner is a huge obstacle people face in trying to move their family up the economic class hierarchy over the course of their lifetime. The good news is that our new sponsor, Lexington Law, would like to help you if you are dealing with this problem. Go to lexingtonlaw.com. Start today with a free consultation and review. Tell them I, Megyn Kelly, sent you at lexingtonlaw.com. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.